This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so good evening everyone and welcome back to a fresh new session on credit risk modeling. And we were discussing the Basel models for the QRRE segment or the qualifying revolving retail exposure. And while I talk about the qualifying revolving retail exposure, we are kind of focusing on credit cards as one of as the product. Now, credit cards, as we know, are revolving products. They are unsecured products. They do not have any definite time. They do not have a definite maturity, as well as because they're unsecured, they do not have any, you know, they do not have any collateral associated with them, and hence they are one of the most riskiest lending propositions that the bank has, or that a bank has to offer. So these are some of the, so that is some of the important questions. So these are some of the important questions that we are, so, some of the important questions that we were kind of involved, that we were kind of interested in looking was number one, how do we, so what exactly is the product? How does Basel define the product? And along with that, we were also interested in exploring how exactly is it that the model, how exactly is it that this, what would be the key steps of developing this model? And on the other hand, we were also involved, we are also looked into the fact that how are the models built. Now, the approach of model building that I am kind of considering over here is the segmentation framework, right? So while we talk about the segmentation framework, we kind of talked about the PD model framework that was there. We had talked about the data preparation and quality check analysis, the steps that we need to follow, and so on. Now we are in the stage where we are discussing the PD. So we are discussing the model construct, the segmentation construct of the PD model, the LGD model, and the EAD model. Now, after this, the second set of segmentation, the second set of factor that we need to look into is how exactly is it that we would assess the model, and not only assess the model, how exactly is it that we would validate the performance of the model. And when I talk about model validation performance, I'm not only talking about validation using validation data, but also when I'm kind of monitoring the model over a period of time, how is it that I would exactly be doing that. So these are some of the important topics that we are going to discuss in this session, right? So in the last session we had focused totally, we were kind of focusing on the PD model, right, on the PD segments. Now one of the important thing over here is that while I talk about the PD segment, right, so one very important thing over here is that so we saw that the segments need to be very intuitive in nature. So even if you get a statistical split at a particular node and you have several sub segments, right? So you should be in a position to have this delinquency. So you must be in a position to utilize. Your segments must be about where it can kind of clearly distinguish between the riskiness of the borrowers, right? So that is something that we had looked into. Now, also these segments must have this clear distinguishing capacity. That is, the bad rates across the segment must be statistically significantly different, for which we would for which we tested the ANOVA test to be done as the mean difference test, and the second test that we talked about was the rank ordering test, right? So our objective over here is that if pool of loan A is more riskier than pool of loan B, then at each time point, pool of loan A has to be more risky than pool of loan B. So kind of looked into each of these segments, right? And the detailing and the description has been done. Now, the next set of questions that came out over the next set of questions that we wanted to talk about over here is that how is it that the segment is the segment level ID is identified. So the segment level PD is defined. Now, the objective of segmentation is to divide the entire portfolio into homogeneous groups of loans, right? So as you divide them into homogeneous groups of loans, so those groups of loans will apply to any snapshot month on which you run the data, right? So whenever you run it on a particular snapshot month, so you will always get your accounts to be divided in that group. So, but each segment there will always be multiple months. So across, so you'll get those segments across all your snapshot months. So let's say I take the first segment over here, right? So let's say I take the first segment over here. So which is this segment. Now the pooled PD over here is 0.8%. So whenever I try to identify this, right? So whenever I try to identify this, right, what happens is I'll get a pool. So basically, whenever I try to identify this, I'll always kind of get to see the. Uh, so I'll always kind of get to see the observed number of goods and bads, and I'll always be able to identify the accounts in that segment. So in a given segment, right, what we want to know is that at each segment level, how much is the bad rate, right? And whatever will be the segment level bad rate, so what will be the whatever will be the bad rate, right? So what we'll do is we will take an average of that, and the average of that bad rate will be the segment level bad rate, right? So over here, if you see this, you will see that there are, so by this segment, by this segmentation logic, for a 20 month, for the month 2012-06, there is this number of total accounts in this particular segments. Out of that, 124 had turned bad. So the percentage of the bad rate percent is 1%. Now for the same for 2012-07, right? It is this is the volume of number of accounts which satisfy the criteria mentioned in this segment. So what is this segment basically? So let's try to understand that. So this segment is non-delinquent but less than 12 months on books. So over here what you see is that in 2012-06, in this so accounts which are QRE accounts and has used, or so are QRE accounts and has kind of used this balance. So 2012-06, so I have the volumes over here and I have the bats, right? And I have the bat rate. So over here it says that in 2012-06 there are 12,346 accounts which are non-delinquent but has a month vintage less than 12 months. And so there is a QRR user who are non-delinquent but has vintage less than 12 months. Now in 2012-06 there are 12,346 such accounts, out of which 124 accounts had turned out to be bad, right? So from there, one thing that you can clearly see is that this is like so the bad rate for that month, for that particular snapshot month, is 1%. Now similarly, as I go to 2012-07, I see like similar kind of volume, right, and with a certain number of bad, right? So what you see over here is, so you see that this is 0.69. In 2012-08, this is like this. So for all the snapshot months, for the next 12 months or the next 6 months, whenever you whatever snapshots you take, right? So you will see that this distribution of the accounts. So what you will see over here is that the overall segment, so for each of the month, whatever the PD is, right? So the long run average of this segment is zero point 0.8, right? So that is the pooled PD or the segment level PD. So like this, you can also you calculate it for all the months, right? So you have your accounts which are there. So for all the accounts, you first distinguish the account basis their riskiness. Now for each of the months, you find out the bad rate that is there. The long run or the average bad rate will be your segment level bad rate. So when I say you are looking the segment level, so when you are doing the segment level bad rates, you are doing it over all the snapshot months, right? So you are taking the data across the cycle. So therefore, this point, this PD that you will get will be mimicking the through the cycle PD. Because the point, but the biggest challenge in a credit card model is to get to the TTCPD because over here most of the variables are point in time variables and they keep on changing. So one thing that you do is you look at the long run average of the PD. So from there you get the through the cycle PD because the time period that you have considered over here for developing the model contains the entire cycle of period, preferably including a down period, right? So the segment level PD will be something which is similar to or which will be mimicking or replicating or approximating the bad rate, right? So that is something that we have. So we have the segment level bad rate. So like this for each of the segments, you will have uh, the bad rate. So this is how we assign the segment level PD. So the segment level PD that we are assigning over here is nothing but a long run average of the probability of, right? So this is how we calculate the segment level, right? Okay. So from here, the next question that comes out is I have the pool, I have the so similarly once I have looked into the PD model, similarly I can also look into the segments of the EAD model as well. So we have also seen how is it that the model design of the EAD model is created, right? So now the question is that I having developed this model, having scored the segments, right? So for each account, whichever account satisfies this definition, right? So whichever account kind of satisfies this, uh, whichever satisfies these segments will be assigned to the pool level PD. So whenever an account is a QRRE active non-delinquent with month on book less than 12, the PD that will be assigned is 0.8. So similarly, if you have MOB greater than equal to 12, the PD over here is kind of 0.5. So basically what you say is that okay, if an account is greater than equal to 12, uh, active QRRE active non-delinquent with a higher vintage with the seasoned vintage, then it is the decline in the average payment balance ratio which decides how risky the particular account is, right? So from there, what you do is you say that okay, the PD is 0.5, 0.7. So now what you do is you arrange them according to their uh, PD, right? And then you will see that the risk ordering. So then the next thing that you do is you will see that the risk ordering is kind of so the risk across them is rank order, right? So so when I have created the segments, I have not really kind of maintained that order. So when we represent the segment, the order is that as you move across, your riskiness must kind of gradually decrease. So basically over here, MOB greater than 12, and then uh, your decline should greater than equal to zero point 0.7 should have been there. Then decline less than 0.7 should have been. So you could see that the risk is gradually decreasing, right? So we'll just take that pooled PD order and we'll just sort them according to the the bedroom. So you will see that it is kind of declared. Fine. So from here, one of the things that one of the takeaways that we have is that when the segments happen, they start either from the most risky to the least risky, or they start from the least risky to the most risky. So it must have a certain order, otherwise the rank ordering will not be maintained. Right? So you need to ensure that the rank ordering is maintained throughout. So, so whenever any split happens, you will see that. So let's say I'm splitting the second segment, MOB greater than equal to 12, right? And then MOB greater than 12 is being split in terms. Now I need to ensure that the segment level PD that both of these segments are getting must be lower than this PD, because the broader segment that I have over here is less riskier than this. So the average, the figures that I get independently must be lower than this. So this is something which is higher. I mean, this is something which we have, right? Now, having said this, the next question that comes over here is that how do I? So we have already seen how to assess the stability of the segments. So I can clearly say that how is the mean difference test is working, how exactly is the rank ordering test working. Now the next question is I have developed the model, and I developed the model, I validate it on the in sample validation, in sample data, which is the 30%. So basically, when I'm developing the model, the whole model in data is divided into a 70%, 70-30 split. But the model is developed on the 70% and validated on the 30%, right? And also the second set of validation which is done is the out of time validation. Now, when we are doing the out of time validation, it is very important to understand too that deterioration needs to be captured. So, so the Gini, the case, and all the capability, the model goodness of fit, data logistic at a development level must be something. But when you move away from there, you will have a certain split as well, right? So, so that is the second part to the story. That I need to assess the so basically to assess how robust is your model, you need to look into not only the case and the development data, but you also need to look into the deterioration which happens. So that is something which is right. Okay. So now the next question is to assess the model's performance. So how exactly would I assess that how good or how bad the model is? What are the matrices of doing that? Okay. Okay. So over here, Shashank has a question: then how is it that the pool IDs are created? The pool IDs are created basis the levels of the segmentation. So PD stands for the model that you have, that we are building. Then we have one. So you see that first, at the first level of segmentation, right, in the first level of segmentation, it is the first segment which has been chosen, the QRL. So it is 1 1. So out of the first segment, so in the first level, it is the first segment, 1 1. Then in level 2, this is the first segment, right? So that's 2 1. In the third level, this is the first segment. So this is 3 1. And it does at the fourth level, it does not have anything. So therefore, it is 4 0. Right. So the segment is, so this ID at it says shows you the level of segmentation and the sub segment that it is. So similarly, you would see for this delinquent base, so it is 1 1 because QRRE was one level 1, it was QRRE, so 1 1. Now in the 2, so this is 2 2. So at the second level, this is the second segment. Then at the third level, this is the, so basically then you see that in the third level, it is the third segment. So 1 2 and 3, the third level, this is the third, and in the fourth level, this is the third. This is on the fourth level, this is the third. So like this, you have your segment ID or your pooled ID, pool IDs created. But at the end, again, this is an ID variable. You can try to identify it whatever way you want. So this is the nomenclature that we had used while I had used while I was kind of working. So these are the so this is how the basic segmentation is created. Now after the segments are created, and you have your model and you've stored all your accounts. Now you need to assess the data, assess the performance of your model, and you need to assess the performance of your model in the out of sample with the in sample validation, and you need to identify it with the out of time data, the OT data, right? So this is something that we would need to take into account. So the first thing is it is case Gini, which is so first of all, the discriminatory capacity. Now, while I talk about the discriminatory capacity, the deterioration is 10%, less than equal to 10% is considered insignificant. Now, let's say I have computed the case Gini for my development data. I have calculated the case Gini for my validation data, right? So when I go to, so this is how I had calculated the development and the validation data. Now I go to the validation data, right? Now what happens is I see that the case over here has been improved and it has not changed much. So over here I'm saying that if it is, so the percentage change in the validation data that has happened from the development data is the deterioration. Now this deterioration can be negative or it can be positive. So if there is a deterioration, it is positive. If there is an improvement, it is negative. But we look into the absolute value. So if you look into the deterioration percentage, it is the percentage change between these two values, absolute percentage change between these two values. Okay. And when you are doing the out of time data, you also look into the population stability index. When you are looking into the population stability index, so one of the important things that we need to understand is that how is it that this, what does this population stability index do? So what it does is, so after you have, let's say you have scored all your accounts and you've done a decide, you look into the decide distribution, the development data. Now, if you do the same kind of, if you use that same set of decides, you will see that the percentage of account in each of the score decides has changed, right? So previously, let's say there were let's say 5.91%. Now there is 5.56%. So previously there was 3.17%. Now there is 3.27%. So So first, from some score buckets, balances, some accounts have flown in, some from them has flown out. But what has the overall distribution of the population changed? So how much that shift has been, that is done at the decile level and added up to look into the PSI, the Population Stability Index. And when we look into the Population Stability Index, we have the, so we basically say that if the shift is less than 10%, this is insignificant. 10 to 25 substantial, more than 25 it is severe, right? So when we are looking into the performance of the model, we also look into how exactly the model is performing across multiple out of time. And if you are actually looking into out of time, then you also need to look into the population stability index. So whether the population, the sample on which you're validating the data, has that sample gone through a distinct shift. So that is something that we need to look into, right? So when we are trying to assess the behavior of or the performance of a model, we are trying to assess it in terms of number one, the discriminatory capacity of the model, right? The discriminatory capacity of the model is decided in terms of the case and the Gini. Now, when I talk about the case and the Gini, if the deterioration is less than 10%, it is considered to be insignificant. Between 10 to 25% is considered to be a considerable shift, and more than 25% is considered to be a severe shift, right? So if that is something which has happened, you know that the model's discriminatory capacity has actually swayed over, right? So across the multiple OTs, multiple out of time samples that you use. So let's say you have developed the model using the time period of from maybe 2006 to 2018. Now you use 4 months of 2019, or let's say 18 and 19 as out of time samples, and across each of those months for which you use, you look into them whether the population distribution has shifted across the sport size or not. So that itself will be a check of the deterioration in the model performance. Now, once that deterioration is observed, right? So if you observe that there has been a deterioration, then you know that the segmentation is such that which is not really very robust. Now, if there has been a deterioration and there has been a major shift with the population stability index, then you know that whatever has happened is very risky, right? Then you know that that model cannot perform on that, because that sample is totally different from what your development data are. So generally for all those out of time samples where the PSI is green, if your Gini actually drops, you know that there is a big challenge, right? So there, that is something that we need to understand. So that is something that we need to develop. Right? Okay. Now, after we have talked about the discriminatory capacity, The next thing that we talk about is the accuracy of the model, that is the percentage shift. So how is it that you would understand that whether the model is accurately predicting or not? Now, the accuracy is looked into by comparing the actual loss and the expected loss. Right. So you have an actual observed default rate series for every month, and you have a and you have a predicted PD series for every month. Now the question is, there will always be a difference between the actual and the expected plots. The question is, up to what extent of increase, I mean, up to what extent of difference can I actually tolerate in my data? So what is the tolerable limit of this increase or this decrease? So that is something that, so that is what we need to understand. So if you see this part, so over here, it is said that for the estimated figure, for whatever I have estimated, I need to build in the a 90% confidence interval of that, right? So plus 90% minus 90%, so I need to build a certain confidence interval. So once I have built a 90% confidence interval, so there is a lower end value and there is a upper end value. Now the question is that if, let's say, I have predicted a probability of default of 3%, and the actual bad rate is 9 outside that the upper end of the 90% confidence interval, then I know that it is not really, so that prediction is not actually accurate. So my tolerable limit is in the 90% confidence. So as long as the actual figures are lying within that 90% confidence interval figure, I know that my model prediction is correct. Now, if, let's say, I have predicted 3% or 8% and the figure is lying, let's say the actual loss is less than 8%, but lying below the lower limit of the 90% confidence, lower tail of the 90% confidence limit, then I'm not worried because I'm thinking more, my model is predicting more than what is required. But in a capital model, I'll be really concerned if it is more than, like if it was more than that 90% confidence interval, within the confidence limit. So over here, my objective is that if it is more than 90% confidence, it lies outside the 90% confidence of the estimated bad rate, right? Now, then there is a serious accuracy issue. Now, on the other hand, now this is for the modeling perspective. However, when you are monitoring that model, that accuracy issue must persist for at least, for more than a quarter, for, let's say, more than 3 months or more. Then that shift is considered to be a severe shift. However, in a modeling exercise, if that accuracy, the overall accuracy is like outside this confidence limit, I'll say that no, that's a bad model because the model is not really accurate. Because over here, when I'm actually trying to compute accuracy, right? Accuracy. So my accuracy has to be my actual must lie very close to my predicted, right? So I have to be very confident within a certain limit. That right now my model is a good model if the observed default rate lies within the 9% confidence interval of my probability of default estimate. Right. So that's the accuracy part of the model. And the third is the stability of the model. So when I'm talking about the stability of the model, I'm talking about the population stability index. I'm talking about the significant shift and so on. So it says that if the shift is less than 10%, it's not a very significant shift. If that shift is lying between 10%, 25%, then that's a moderate shift. And if it is lying above 20%, 25%, then there is severe risk. So then there is a severe shift. So this is where these three are Okay, so discriminatory capacity, accuracy of the model, and the stability of it. So these are the three matrices based on which I would also need to validate my model. Once my model is developed, I will score all the accounts, and I would use these matrices to assess the stability. Right? So just have a quick look through this matrices. These three matrices, discriminatory capacity, accuracy, and stability for the PD model. Just take a couple of minutes time and go through this. I'll just be back in a minute and we'll get started. Just go through this. Okay, fine. Pritam has a question that for a segmented model post application of decision tree, the segment PDs arrived by averaging the snapshot bad rates, right? And the validation is done in the same way. Is there any application of logistic regression here? No. Over here, Pritam, the model itself is the segmentation model because you are developing multiple segments. And what you are trying to do is you are trying to group them into homogeneous pools of loans in terms of their riskiness. Now, logistic regression is an alternate way of developing a PD model, right? So it is an alternate way. Now, on the other hand, now if you want to develop a logistic regression driven model, then you need to build the data accordingly, then build the first level of segmentation at least first. So so what you do is you build the first level of the first three, say the risk based segment, the QRRE and the risk based segmentation, and then for each of those segmented models, each of those segments, you develop a separate model, right? So that will kind of be a modeling exercise, right? So now the question that comes out over here is that why not logistic regression here? Logistic regression is obviously an alternate method because Basel does not require me to score each of the accounts or provide a score or convert it into a point to double odds or something like that. Therefore, my objective is just to group the homogeneous pools of just to group the accounts into homogeneous groups, right? And then and that is why I am using a segmentation framework over here. Now, the alternate set of model that you have can also be a logistic regression model. Yeah. Now, okay. So the next question that Peter has is, so for the segmented model with decision tree, how to find the case and the gene? Now, case and Gini has nothing to do with logistic regression. So here you are building the segment level PDs, right? So for each of the account which comes in, you will be assigning that segment level, the respective segments wherever they lie. So based on that, you are assigning the segment level PD. So you're actually scoring them. The Gini and the case is obtained by dividing this probability of default values into score deciles. So as long as you have that probability score generated, right, you can divide them into score deciles, and hence you can generate your case and Gini. So the case and the Gini is not related to the method through which the score is being generated. It is based on the score that is generated. So you are generating the score over here through the segment. So accounts whichever, let's say accounts whichever accounts are, so in the data, right, whichever accounts are non-delinquent, within them whichever accounts are less than 12, less than and they will be less than 12 will be given the school PD.8. Now out of there will be some accounts which will be delinquent. Now within delinquent, utilize this split is done, and based on this, so this characteristic is satisfied, this score is assigned to all those. Now whatever all your portfolio is, so whatever be the accounts in your portfolio, they will fall in either one of those segments. So whichever segment they fall in, that pool PD will be assigned to them. So for each account, you will get a score. Now, in a logistic regression model, that score is being generated through the logistic regression model or through that log odds. Over here, the log odds and then the sigma transformation. And over here, you are dividing you're creating the segments, and for each of the segments, you're calculating the score and you're assigning it to the accounts. So the segmentation framework over here is the mechanism which is generating the segment level scores. But you are actually scoring all the accounts, right? So as long as you are scoring the accounts, you can always generate that case and the G. Clear? Perfect. Okay.
I mean, how does this PDs arriving from the decision tree? Like,
Sorry, Shashank, I did not get your question. Can you repeat once again?
I'm asking these PDs, these bad rates. How does we getting this from the decision tree, right?
No, no. From the decision tree, you are getting the splits, right?
The cutoff
So once
splits.
you're getting the splits, like at level one, this is where this split is happening, and you are getting your segments. Then you are so then on your data now you are looking okay. So this is the segment. So you are choosing one of the segments now. Let's say PD 112 13140. I just discussed this sometimes back, right? So for this segment, on a so this segment will be there in all the snapshot months that you have. So over here it's like 2012-06. Then let's say you have not do this for ED, it's the quarterly snapshots. So then this is something like 2013, 2012 09, 2012 12. This is it's 2013 03. 2013-06, 2013-09, 2013, right? So now this is the segment. Now for every month, for all the snapshot months, there will be some accounts which are non-active and less than 12 months as on the snapshots. So for all those accounts, they will be all be classified in under this risk, and this will be there for across all the snapshot months. So in all those snapshot months, you will get there will be some, you will get the total number of accounts in that month and the total number of bads for each of the months. So for each of the months, you can actually calculate a bad rate. Now the average of these bad rates for all the snapshot months, the average of these bad rates across all the snapshots will be your segment level bad. So the segment level bad rate for this is 0.8. So for each of for a given segment ID, right? So for a given segment ID, you have so you have the segment for all the months. For all the months, you calculate the bad rate. So what you are doing over here is you are actually calculating a series of the bad rates. So when you take the average of the bad rates, this is going to be the long run average. When you get that long run average, this long run average will be your, because the data that you have over here is over the cycle, including the downturn period. So therefore, this is kind of a through the cycle estimate. So this PD that you are having over here is the long run PD, right? So which is an approximation of your through the cycle PD. So this is the segment level bad rate that you assign. So similarly for the next segment, you will for all the snapshot months, we'll take them, we'll see how many who are total accounts are there, how many bads fall under that segment. Then you find out the bad rate, take the average, and you get the segment level bad. Or I should say, this is not the should not use the term bad rate over here. Segment or so this is how you calculate the segment level PD or the right.
So this is part of the development, model development, right? It is not
This is part of
validation.
no. First you develop the model and you get the segment level PD. Then you score all your data, your development data with the segment level PDs. So once you have that score, then you generate all your case and Gini and everything. Then you apply that the same segmentation structure on your development data with the same with the scoring mechanism, and you check how your validation accounts are getting scored. You have your development, you have your validation, and then what you do is you compute the case and the Gini for your development data as well, and then compare it across all the data sets. So you have your entire model development data that you are dividing it into a 70-30 split. So once you divide it into 70-30 split, you develop the model on the 70% and you validate it on the 30%, right? And
Okay.
apart, so that's the sample validation. The second set of validation that you do is the out of time validation. So where you are validating it on different time periods using the same model, and you are seeing how the score distribution is and how exactly is the so what exactly is the score distribution. Uh, then you look into how the model is working and so on. So so that is how we generally tend to do it. So, and then you compare all your model results together. So you have your development, you have your validation, your out of sample validation, you have your out of time validation, and you're checking for each of these matrices whether they are getting your rating or not.
And how we getting doing this decision tree work, like for getting these splits?
So you're asking how are we constructing the decision tree, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come to that. I have not discussed the decision tree as of now. I have not discussed it yet. I'll come to the decision tree separately because quite a lot of
All right.
statistical and discussion will come. So the next tab over here is your decision tree. I'll come to it. So having discussed about the probability of default model, the next set of model that we want to kind of talk about over here is the exposure at default models. So this is the next important probability, the next set of model that we want to discuss. The first set of, so again similarly the first level of regulatory, the first will be the regulatory segmentation. So it is again the qualifying revolving detail exposure. That's a similar thing that we have done. Right, and this is the others. So this is the other read. So you have your QRRE and you have your other read. Now within this, the utilization less than equal to 0. Now, when I talk about the utilization less than equal to 0, now this is, so generally it is like utilization equal to 0. So these are for those set of accounts which are your say inactive accounts, so accounts which have not been kind of having, or which has not been kind of performing, right? So these are performing in the sense that they have hardly been using their balances. So this is the segment of such a segment of people. Right. Now, if I say utilization is negative, as in they have not been kind of using anything. They have not been using their credits. Okay, so obviously those people are the people who have been using. I mean, the utilization has been absolutely very low and hardly any utilizations happening and so on. So these obviously will be the least risky segment, and you don't need to further divide this segment into any part. Now, the concerned segment that we have over here will always be the one which has a utilization greater than zero, and the one which has a utilization which is like very sufficiently greater than zero. It is not just being for the sake of being. Right. So this is a very important segment that the business would have. Mm. Right. So this is a segment where the utilization happens. Now, utilization happens as in that this is the segment of people who are actually using their cards. So obviously, the riskiness of the accounts who are using their card and what's the segmentation of those accounts which are not using their cards is very different. So therefore, the so this is a level of split which should always happen. Now the second, so from here now accounts which are not utilizing cards, so they are the inactive accounts. So you don't need to assess their exposure at default because they are not using anything. So the utilization is very minimal, and hence even if they are defaulting, the total balance that on which they default is not very significant. So I don't think that I would need to split that, because the second reason over here is that when we are building segments using decision trees, right, that utilization would or that segment on being split must, so any segment or any sub segment should at least contain 5% of the overall population. Now, if you are actually dividing a segment which has like 9% of the population, then the final split that you have will be very less. I mean, the population size will actually be very low, right? So that is where we need to have banding. So the utilization greater than zero is something which we have already talked about. Now the segment which is where the utilization is positive is the one that we must focus on, and that utilization is utilization greater than zero less than equal to 95 and headroom greater than 100. So over here we saw that with utilization, if the utilization becomes very high and the headroom falls below a certain limit, the CCF definition changes, right? So again, from there, right, even if you are not doing a statistical segmentation, you can say that that will be a clear demarcation of a riskiness, right? So accounts who are utilizing their balances will will not be as risky as accounts which are not utilizing, I mean, which are overutilizing their balances. So basically over here, what we would expect to have is this split that at utilization between 0 to 95% and headroom which is greater than 100, I will kind of get a split, right? So obviously, one of the most important segments that we build over here is the utilization greater than 0, less than equal to 95%, and the headroom is greater than 100, right? The utilization, so obviously this segment will be relatively less risky than the segment which overutilizes the balance. So you don't really need a decision tree to make this segmentation, right? All you can simply do is, if this is so intuitive a segment that you know that now if you see this, right, you see that accounts which are export, which are EAD accounts, right? You have a QRRE segment, QRRE other into the regulatory segmentation. Among the QRRE segment, who are more riskier? Accounts who have positive utilization. I need to focus on them. Who are not, who have a very negligible utilization, or something which is less than zero, is something which is not which is out of the scope, and that size of the overall population will also be very low. So therefore, the utilization less than equal to 0%, the utilization is greater than equal to 0, greater than 0, and then the level 3 segmentation is utilization. Now accounts out of that who are utilizing it, so the one who are overutilizing it are more riskier. So you don't really need a decision tree to build this segment, right? It's a very intuitive segment. So if you are actually building a segmentation driven model, the first 2-3 levels of segmentations that happen are very intuitive segments. Now once you have divided them by the major risk characteristic, then when you want to fine tune them and get into the next granular level of riskiness, that is where the next set of models start coming in. Okay. Okay. Now, once I have divided them, now I need to find out those variables based on which I need to further segment. Now, once the utilization is, so I have a high utilization, low utilization. Now the question is that how do I divide these risks? So, so how is it that this riskiness will be kind of further divided? Now, your variable is a utilization variable and a headroom. So based on that, you have divided that segmentation. Now, the next question is of splitting them. So out of utilization and headroom, which is the one which is more important? So the next level of split. So now this split that you do has to be done using a decision tree, because you don't know what are the values where the split will happen or where the cuts will happen. So this fourth level of segmentation will be more of a statistical segmentation, right? And you are saying that okay, at a utilize, so for accounts whose utilization is 0 to 95, I can see that at further levels of utilization, for utilization less than 68%, between 68 and 86%, there is a different riskiness, and between 86 and 95, there is a different very riskiness. So within utilization, again, it is granularly splitting the riskiness. So obviously, a guy who will have a higher utilization will always have a higher risk, right? Uh, sorry. Oh, oh, sorry. Sorry. It is fine. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so over here, what you can see is that as the utilization increases, the bad rate or the CCF increases, because my target variable here is not ED but the CCF. So the CCF gradually increases. Now, and then that's pretty understandable, right? So higher the utilization is, the greater will be the chances of the guy to do additional drawings, and from the data snapshot to the data default. So obviously the pool CCF will kind of increase. Now, for those accounts who are overutilized accounts, right? So accounts who have kind of overutilized their utilization. So basis on that, so how do you distinguish them? So obviously over here, utilization has been very high, right? So it is the limit which will divide the segment. So if the limit less than a certain value, limit more than a certain value will decide. So out of those accounts which have a lower limit will obviously have a lower exposure. And accounts which have a higher limit above a certain value will be having a higher exposure. So at that part, what you are doing is you are splitting out your data. So in the second case, when the utilization has become very high and the headroom has fallen below a certain amount, it is the limit which judges that which is the account. So even everything else remaining unchanged, if the limit, so an account with a higher limit will always have a higher exposure at default, and hence that will become a segment. Right. So now like this, you can again further move into creating other levels of segmentation. We still had sufficient volumes, but we kind of divided it into 4 or 5 levels. Right. So again, similarly over here, we have created these EAD IDs, and based on each of those accounts, you'll have obviously have some number of accounts, and you have a CCF. You take the long run average of the CCF, and you get the segment level CCF. Now, for each of those accounts, you assign the CCF, and with the balance, outstanding balance, and the headroom, you just go ahead and calculate what exactly is the exposure at default. So this ratio is something which you so this is what the exposure at default segmentation structure is. Now the question that comes out again over here is that the target variable for EAD model is something different. It is not the same as. So it is not the same as the PD model, right? So in the PD model, it was 1 and 0. Over here, it is not a 1 and 0 thing. Over here, it is a fractional thing, right? So it is lying between 0 and 1, but it's not a 0 and 1 kind of thing. So over here, the next level of thing that we need to understand is that how would I kind of go and validate the EAD models. Now, for the exposure at default model, yes, you can assess the discriminatory capacity by using the KX and the G. So over here, what you need to do is you need to create exposure at EAD bands, right? You need to create EAD bands, and obviously your CCF will be kind of declining. So it is expected to decline. So as your exposure, as you move from a lower exposure at default to a higher exposure at default, or from a higher exposure at default to a lower exposure at default, your number of bad accounts are kind of expected to reduce. So that way you can actually calculate the case energy. Now, For accuracy of the model, you have a EAD. So you have a continuous variable over here. You don't have a categorical variable. So you have a continuous variable. So given this continuous variable, you have the Spearman's rank correlation between the observed and the estimated LGDs, right? So you do a rank correlation. So basically, you will have. So what you are trying to do is you are trying to assess the association between the actual and the observed yields. When you are doing the Spearman's rank correlation, so this can be very easily done in SAS. You have a function called proccore, right? So using proccore, you can do that. So the Spearman's rank correlation between the observed and the estimated EAD is something that we would need to look at, right? So right. So when you do the correlation, so what you are trying to do is you're trying to see how associated are your observed and the predicted EAD. So obviously you get a predicted EAD from the predicted. So you're predicting the CCF to segmentation. From there you are calculating the estimated EAD. You have the observed EAD figures, right? You have the observed EAD figures, and from there what you are trying to do is you're trying to see how exactly is it that so you have the observed CCF. From that observed CCF, you can always calculate the observed EAD. So, and from the predicted CCF series, you get the predicted EAD. Now you have two continuous series, and if you have to assess their association, then what you need to do is you need to plot them together. Now, one way is you can access the looking the Spearman's rank correlation coefficient. On the other hand, another thing that you can do is you can actually calculate accuracy measures like mean square percentage error, mean absolute error, and you can just check whether how closely they are to each other, right? And the model which is segmentation framework which gives you the least mean square percentage error is the one which you would want to use for model development, right? Yeah. Any questions up to this point on the segments that we have talked about?
Tanmay,
Yeah.
uh, Tanmay, for LGD also we'll be using similar segments on utilization, or for
No,
LGD what
no, 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 no,
segments?
no, no, no. For utilization variables for a QRRE product,
Mm,
utilization variables are absolutely specific to the EAD model. So you do not use this utilization features for LGD. For LGD, the features will be totally different.
okay.
So the LGD features will be more based on the bad definition. For on the LRDs, it will be more on the 90 days past due and so on. So I'm coming to the LGD features next.
Okay, okay,
So
okay. Cool. And the decision tree will be basically for the level 3, right? Statistical and
yeah,
level
so
4.
we have done for level 3 and 4, but so you can do it up to level 5. So as long as you have sufficient volume, you can always go ahead to the next step and break the segment. But every time you are breaking the building a new segment, right? You need
Hmm.
to actually validate one, that segment is intuitive, right? The second
Mhm.
is it is heterogeneous, so you need to do the mean difference test, and that it is rank order. If any one of these three tests fails, then that segment cannot be used as a potential segment,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Right.
So now the third set of models, obviously, that we have is the LGD model. So for LGD, let us kind of very quickly, before I go to the model, let's kind of quickly assess the structure, that the LGD model has. Or I mean, when I say structure, what I mean is, you know, the model design, right? So obviously there will be two set of models over here. So one of the models are So one of the set of the model that we have over here is the NCT1 model, the NCT-A, which is for the non-defaults, NCT-B, which is for the defaults. So that is the for one you have one is the fixed cohort method, and the other is the fixed horizon method, and the second is the cohort method. So for the fixed horizon method, it is for the defaulted accounts, we have the fixed horizon method where we have like 36 months of for all the defaulted accounts for each of the months. We take the next 36 months of recovery. If the recovery is computed, then if it's completed, it's a complete workout. We use that full recovery period. If it is an incomplete workout, we use the chain ladder approach to predict the next 36 months of recovery, and from there we divide it into the segments, right? So this segmentation that you can see over here is based on, so this segmentation is for the LGD model where the accounts have already defaulted. This is not for this is not for the cohort method. I could not compile it for the cohort method and do it. I should do in the next class. So this is for the fixed horizon method for the set of accounts which have already defaulted and you have the next 36 months of recovery. So over here, there are two things. One is the qualifying revolving retail exposure, and the other is the other retail. Again, so this level of segmentation always remains unchanged. Right now, if you have already figured out QRR, you just need to show that out of the for the total loss given default, the total base when I talk about, that's the total portfolio. So out of the total portfolio, this is QRR, this is other retail. So this level of segmentation shows this, nothing else. Right. So over here, if you have a look into the segmentation, that you have a qualifying revolving retail exposure. So the first level of segmentation is for the type of the default. So whether the account is 90 days past due and written off, so whether it is a loan restructure or whether it is a payment plan. Now the riskiness of these borrowers will be different, or the loss that you get from the portfolio will be different for each of these segments, right? So you would have the payment plan, payment plan. So accounts which have undergone a payment plan, what is that? That you are unable to pay the EMI for a particular product, therefore the payment structure has been altered for you, right? So the payment structure over there has been altered, nothing else. So it is not that. So the payment structure has been altered, right? But it is related to that product. So let's take two cases. There are two borrowers who have a personal loan, a credit card, and a car loan going with the same bank. There are two. Now both of them default. One goes through a payment plan for the uh, auto loan, and the other undergoes a loan restructure (LRD). So with a payment plan, what will happen is only that auto loans payment plan will be restructured. So the payment plan will be changed because this guy is able to pay the money for the other two EMIs, but for the car loan it is not able to. But it is one of all the risk is related to one of the products. However, for a loan restructured, for a restructured loan, the borrower is unable to pay for any of the product. Hence, all the three loans are clubbed up and a new product is done, is created, and a new payment term is used. So therefore, the riskiness of repayment or repaying is much lower for the accounts which are undergoing an LRD compared to those accounts which are undergoing a payment plan. Right. So it is very difficult to say, so it is very, so the riskiness of the payment plans will always be lower compared to that of the loan structured accounts. Right. So restructuring always has the high risk. And 90 days past due is the 90 is just a fresh default. So it has just hit the 90 days and has just been written off. So you still have a lot of hope of this thing, this guy coming in and paying back, trying to recover. So, so they are relatively less risky because they're still not with the charge of funds. But if you are going through an LRT, always means that you have already got deep into your defaults and you are into a mess. Right. So this is the third is the level 3 segmentation. Right. So now again, so if you have a
Uh,
payment plan. Yeah.
Tarun, I have one quick question. Uh, on the restructuring, uh, let's say there is a customer who is on the restructuring contract. His contract is restructured. So how will his recovery be? Like his recovery would be also. I mean, his collaterals would be then reduced from his exposure, or how it would be treated for LG? How would that the
So
LGD for
first,
those restructured?
yeah. So for see how exactly recovery structured. Like structured even for a collateral product, I don't know that. Right, I have not worked on that side. But for an unsecured product like a personal loan or a credit card, I can tell you that the entire amount of credit which is outstanding is actually clubbed up together, and then a easier payment mode is made. Let's say they tell you, okay, after this month, so okay, so now you need to pay me this much. Let's say 5% of the total balance. Then after 6 months, 3 months, you need to pay this amount. So instead of paying
Mm.
every month, they make a contract where the payment is kind of eased out over a period of time.
But the LGD would be 100% for those people.
Uh, Not necessarily that LGD will be 100% for them because so they have just that was just been restructured, and then
Mm-hmm.
the way that they are paying back, so that we treated as recovery. So, but generally, yes, for retail, we generally see that the concentration holds at around at a 0 or at a 1. So that's why retail recovery is kind of a bimodal distribution. Now, the distribution within 0, in between 0 and 1 is not very high. So generally, we will see that people are very diligent and customers are diligent, and they have basically you think in retail, right? In these kind of product, credit card product or personal loan product, or it's a part of sales finance portfolio. So there are two types of defaulters. One who is a willing full default. So his idea is I'll take the card, I spend the money, not paying. So they take the money, spend it happily, go to enter into default, don't doesn't pay the amount. So mostly for these accounts, your recovery will be kind of concentrated around 0. Now the second case of people are those people who are unwilling defaulters. So they have defaulted because of some reason or the other. In such a case, we have seen that mostly people try to pay back as much as possible. Therefore, for these set of people, the the thing is kind of concentrated towards that side. So let's say you actually thought a person was good, but he's actually default at acquisition. At acquisition, you thought that he was a good borrower, but now he is defaulting because of some specific reason. So that's something which you understand. So he would be trying to pay back as much as possible, but he enters into default because he has either lost his job or or has suffered a loss in the business or anything. Now the second is willful default. So these people they take the money not paying. So they for these group of people are can be identified from the nature of their transactions. Right. So that is the reason why when new to bank borrowers come in, when new people come in asking for credit cards, right? Banks are very cautious about that because many of them have the capacity tendency to become these willful defaulters or straight rollers, as we call it. Because in point of sales financing, a straight roller is seen very often. Let's say I buy an Apple phone from an Apple store, right? I take it on credit, I sell off the phone to someone else. So I arbitrage that and I don't pay back my money. So in such a case, and so my obviously my credit score goes for a default, but I'm a willful defaulter, I'm not impacted. Now a person who is defaulting now, but is not a willful defaulter can be identified from his history. Right. So that is why bureau information becomes very important. Now, LGD is set at 1 for those accounts, or will be set at 1 for those accounts for whom recovery is not at all possible. Say deceased. Let's say an account has gone deceased. The LGD will be 1 or close to 1. Because if the person is dead, you don't actually expect his heirs to kind of come and pay back until unless it's a joint application. Right. So for LRDs, you're restructuring that entire product for you, right? So you are kind of, so this is not a trouble debt restructure, TDRs. So trouble debt restructuring is kind of used as a term for commercial cases.
Yeah, then my so we'll be basically looking at the LG when we are modeling LGD, we'll be looking at that, right? The segmentation is just to look at how we can segment the obligors or accounts.
No, this is the model. This is the model over here.
Okay.
Because we are developing multiple levels of segments. Now, what we need to do is we need to calculate the LGD for each of the segments, which is not done over here. So I'll show you through an example that how
Okay. Okay.
we can actually calculate the LGD for each of the segments. Right. So what distinguishes the risk is more important. So over here, the level 2 segmentation is based on payment plan LRD and 90%. Now again, in the payment plan, depending on the tenure of the payment plan, can be divided into these things. So basically, the level 3 and the 4 over here was a statistical segmentation which we had done using a decision tree. So over here, when I talk about the payment plan tenure, so higher the tenure, higher is the risk. Right. So lower the tenure, lower will be the risk. Now, loan restructures are actually a very small fraction of the overall portfolio. And we see that they don't go through other, you know, they don't go through much of a further segmentation. The largest proportion that you have over here is always a 90 days. And now, if you look into a 90 DPD and you want to understand how much of it is recoverable or how much of it can be recovered, all you need to do is you need to look into its historical delinquency. So just before entering into this default, right? So how is it that this this segment? I mean, so before it enters into that, So what I have over here is the delinquency behavior. So if you look into the most recent delinquency behavior among those borrowers, right? So how quickly has he entered into a default? You can actually make out that how much can you recover. Let's say there is a person who was trying to cure back, going into default, trying to cure back, going into default. So it meant that this guy always had a tendency to repay back, but he's unable to pay. So his delinquency is not occurring at a consecutive stretch. So if you have a variable which is it doesn't occur at a consecutive stretch, you can say that or we can make out that okay, this guy has very low risk of has no chance of paying me back. But if the consecutive stretch of delinquency is not that much, if it's not that high, you can say that hey look, this guy has been trying to pay me back, but was unable to, hence has a higher chance of paying me back. So that variable will become very important over here. Right. So this is something that we would have over here. Right. Now the question is that how do I calculate the LGD? So for each of the segments, so I'll be generating a segment ID next, and I'll be showing you how to calculate that LGD, the how full level LGD, and then how to assign it for each of the accounts to reach the exposure to reach the EL figures. Okay. So I'll show it to you for some accounts. Let's say a group of 5-10 accounts. I'll show it to you how the segmentation will be done, or how exactly is it that this segmentation model will be implemented. So the next class we talk about, which tomorrow we will talk about the LGD calculation, the LGD validation, so which is already there in the validation framework. So the LGD and the EAD validation will be very similar because the two target variables are very similar, right? So we will do that. After that, what we talk about is the models. So we talk about is the decision tree, and then we see how to implement this particular model, and that will close the discussion on the parser QRR, right? So go through this Excel sheet, see whatever the discussions are. So the discussion that I have done, and then from there we'll take it up to tomorrow's discussion. Thanks so much.